Your mom thought you would never get this far. Then again, why would she? She's just a nurse. My husband Marcus told my daughter Emma, in front of the entire medical faculty and family gathered for her graduation dinner. The words sliced through me like a scalpel. Cold and precise and devastating. My throat constricted and I felt the familiar burn of tears threatening behind my eyes as 24 years of devotion and sacrifice were reduced to professional inadequacy in one cruel sentence. This was my daughter's moment, her triumph, and he had just used it to humiliate me in front of the people whose respect I had spent 15 years earning in emergency rooms. To Emma, Marcus continued, raising his champagne glass with the confident smile he used when closing financial deals, as if his dismissal of me was just the opening to a celebratory toast. 50 pairs of eyes, medical professors, Emma's classmates, our family, turned toward me after witnessing the devastation he'd just delivered. My arthritic hands trembled around my own glass, the pain in my joints amplified by the stress coursing through my body. My irregular heartbeat pounding against my ribs like it was trying to escape. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, his close friend from the country club, stood beside him with practiced sympathy, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the reception lights. I'd noticed how she always appeared whenever we discussed Emma's health, always ready with medical reassurance that contradicted my nursing observations. While some have spent the past years crying wolf, scaring you away from your dreams, Marcus continued, his financial advisor voice carrying across the room filled with actual cardiologists. I'm glad that supporting you all this time has gotten you here. The betrayal cut deeper than the initial dismissal. He was taking credit for Emma's success while painting me as the obstacle, the fearful mother who had tried to hold our daughter back. 3 years of my systematic documentation about Emma's cardiac symptoms reduced to maternal hysteria, while he claimed the role of supportive father using money I'd earned through double shifts and overtime that he'd never even noticed. Emma's face had gone ashen across the room, her medical degree certificate trembling in her hands as she watched her father rewrite history. Several professors shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the dismissal of nursing expertise they respected in their own emergency departments. Last time I checked, nurses didn't give diagnoses, Marcus added with a patronizing chuckle that felt like another knife twist. That's what real doctors like Dr. Mitchell are for. Dr. Mitchell smiled with the practiced authority she'd used to dismiss my observations about Emma's exercise intolerance, heart palpitations, and chest pain for 3 years. Exactly right, Marcus. Some people just see problems that don't exist. The chest pressure building in my ribcage wasn't anxiety. It was heartbreak, mixing with the same cardiac symptoms I'd been documenting in both Emma and myself. My daughter was watching her father systematically destroy her mother's credibility on what should have been the proudest night of our lives. But what Marcus didn't know, what he'd never bothered to learn in 24 years of marriage, was that his just-a-nurse wife had funded Emma's education through those overnight shifts, while maintaining cardiac documentation that any cardiologist would recognize as textbook early-stage cardiomyopathy. I took a shaky breath, straightened my shoulders with the composure that had carried me through thousands of medical emergencies, and replied quietly, "You're right, Marcus. I did what I could." 3 days later, I would show him exactly what this nurse was capable of. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Marcus on the phone in the kitchen, his confident financial advisor voice carrying through our house as if last night's humiliation had been just another successful presentation. "No, Sarah, you don't understand," he was saying to Dr. Mitchell. "Diana's always been like this. She sees medical emergencies everywhere. Last night was just classic anxious mother behavior." I stayed at the top of the stairs, my chest still tight from yesterday's stress, listening as my husband reduced 24 years of devoted motherhood to psychological dysfunction. My arthritic hands gripped the banister as I heard him dismiss not just my professional background, but my fundamental instincts as Emma's mother. "She has no medical training beyond basic nursing," Marcus continued, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he used when explaining complex financial concepts to clients he considered beneath him. "Emma's perfectly healthy. You've confirmed that multiple times. Diana just can't accept that her nursing school paranoia doesn't qualify her to diagnose anything." Nursing school paranoia. 3 years of systematic documentation about Emma's cardiac symptoms reduced to educational inadequacy by a man who couldn't distinguish between a stethoscope and a blood pressure cuff. I made my way downstairs quietly, my irregular heartbeat fluttering as I heard Marcus weave the narrative that would define me in their relationship. The hysterical mother, whose medical concerns were symptomatic of anxiety rather than professional observation. Can you imagine if we'd listened to her? Marcus laughed, the sound cutting through my chest like surgical wire. We'd have had Emma in cardiac specialists for years, traumatizing her with unnecessary tests. Thank God you were there to provide actual medical perspective. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see him pacing with his coffee, gesturing with the same animated confidence he displayed when discussing investment portfolios with clients who trusted his expertise. The irony was devastating. Marcus demanded professional respect in his financial domain while systematically dismantling mine in medicine. Diana needs to understand her limitations, he continued, his voice hardening with the authority he'd been building toward our daughter. Last time I checked, nurses follow doctors' orders. They don't make diagnoses. Maybe it's time she remembered her place in the medical hierarchy. My place in the medical hierarchy. 15 years of cardiac emergency medicine reduced to subservient position by a man whose medical knowledge came from golf course conversations and country club networking. What Marcus didn't know, what he'd been too arrogant to discover in our decades of marriage, was that I'd spent those years not just following orders, but making split-second cardiac assessments that had saved lives. While he was managing investment accounts, I was managing heart attacks, strokes, and cardiac arrests with the kind of systematic precision that his financial planning could never match. The chest pressure was building again, but this time it wasn't anxiety. It was the recognition that my husband had been systematically undermining my professional competence while using my medical expertise whenever it benefited him. Every late-night call about his mother's health, every question about his own blood pressure medications, every request for my nursing opinion about family medical concerns, all while publicly dismissing that same expertise as inadequate. I walked into the kitchen, my professional composure intact, despite the emotional devastation of listening to him reduce me to medical incompetence for Dr. Mitchell's validation. "Good morning, Marcus," I said quietly, watching his face shift from confident dismissal to cautious recognition that I might have overheard his character assassination. What he couldn't see was that his just a nurse was about to demonstrate exactly how much medical knowledge she'd been accumulating while he'd been too busy dismissing her to pay attention. That afternoon, while Marcus was at the office explaining market volatility to clients who actually valued his expertise, I sat in our home office, surrounded by 3 years of medical documentation that told a story he'd refused to hear. My ER training had taught me that patterns don't lie, only people's interpretations of them do. And the pattern spread across my desk was as clear as any cardiac monitor I'd read during 15 years of emergency medicine. Emma's exercise intolerance, documented heart rate irregularities, chest pressure episodes, and fatigue patterns that any cardiac nurse would recognize as textbook early-stage cardiomyopathy. But Dr. Sarah Mitchell had dismissed every symptom, every concern, every systematic observation I'd brought to Marcus's attention. And now I understood why. Marcus's credit card statements told their own devastating story. Hotel charges at the Marriott downtown, the same hotel where the County Medical Association held their monthly meetings. Jewelry purchases from Tiffany's that had never appeared in my jewelry box. Restaurant charges at La Bernardin, on nights when Marcus claimed he was working late with demanding clients. 3 years of systematic financial deception running parallel to 3 years of systematic medical dismissal. My hands trembled as I cross-referenced the dates. Every time I'd raised concerns about Emma's cardiac symptoms, every time I'd suggested we seek a second opinion, every time my nursing paranoia had been dismissed by Dr. Mitchell's professional authority, Marcus had been paying for hotel rooms where that same authority was compromising her medical judgment. The phone rang, startling me from the evidence that was reshaping everything I thought I knew about my marriage. "Diana." Marcus's voice carried that careful tone he used when he thought I might be having another medical episode. "How are you feeling today? You seemed upset this morning." Upset. 24 years of marriage reduced to emotional instability that needed management rather than medical expertise that deserved respect. "I'm fine, Marcus," I replied, my voice carrying the professional calm that had gotten me through thousands of cardiac emergencies, just reviewing some medical information about Emma. "Diana, we've talked about this." His voice took on that patronizing edge that I now recognized as calculated dismissal. "Dr. Mitchell has confirmed repeatedly that Emma is healthy. You need to trust medical professionals instead of creating problems that don't exist." Medical professionals, like the one he'd been sleeping with for 3 years while she deliberately misdiagnosed our daughter to maintain their relationship. "You're right," I said quietly, watching the hotel receipts spread across my desk like evidence in a malpractice case. I should trust medical professionals. What Marcus didn't know was that this medical professional had spent the afternoon doing what ER nurses do best: systematic investigation, detailed documentation, and pattern recognition that revealed not just medical malpractice, but systematic fraud designed to discredit my professional competence. My cardiac symptoms weren't anxiety, they were the physical response to discovering that my husband had been using my medical expertise when convenient while paying another woman to dismiss that same expertise when it threatened their affair. But what neither Marcus nor Dr. Mitchell understood was that 15 years of emergency medicine had taught me something more valuable than cardiac assessment: how to stay calm under pressure while preparing to save lives. Emma's life was at stake, and her mother wasn't just a nurse. She was the only medical professional in this situation who wasn't compromising patient care for personal gain. 3 days from now, I would hand Marcus documentation that would destroy everything he thought he knew about medical authority, professional competence, and the woman whose expertise he'd been systematically undermining while she quietly prepared to save their daughter's life. 2 days after the graduation humiliation, I drove to Johns Hopkins carrying a manila folder that contained 3 years of systematic cardiac documentation that would vindicate everything Marcus had dismissed as nursing paranoia. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, Emma's former pediatric cardiologist and now a professor at the medical school, had agreed to review my observations. Unlike Dr. Mitchell, Dr. Chen had always respected nursing expertise, understanding that emergency room nurses often caught cardiac symptoms that others missed. "Diana," Dr. Chen said as I settled into her office, surrounded by medical journals and cardiac imaging equipment that validated the professional environment I'd missed for years. "You mentioned concerns about Emma's cardiac health. I have to say, her graduation speech about early diagnostic intervention was particularly insightful." My heart rate spiked, not from irregular rhythm this time, but from maternal pride mixed with professional vindication. Emma had been listening to my medical observations, even while her father dismissed them as paranoid overreaction. "Dr. Chen, I've been documenting Emma's symptoms for 3 years," I said, opening the folder with the systematic precision my ER training had ingrained. Exercise intolerance, heart palpitations, chest pressure, fatigue patterns, all consistent with early-stage cardiomyopathy. Dr. Chen reviewed my documentation with the attention Marcus had never given my medical concerns. Her expression grew increasingly serious as she examined the symptom timeline, exercise limitations, and cardiac irregularities I'd recorded with ER precision. "This is exceptionally thorough documentation," she said, looking up with the professional respect I'd been craving for years. "These patterns are concerning. Has Emma been evaluated by a cardiologist?" "Dr. Sarah Mitchell has been dismissing every symptom for 3 years," I replied, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. "She's convinced my husband that Emma is perfectly healthy and that my concerns are maternal anxiety." Dr. Chen's expression shifted to professional concern that transcended polite medical consultation. "Diana, this documentation suggests potential cardiac pathology that requires immediate evaluation. If another physician has been dismissing these symptoms," she paused, understanding the implications of medical negligence. "My husband trusts Dr. Mitchell's authority over my nursing expertise." I continued, watching Dr. Chen's recognition of the professional dismissal that had endangered Emma's health. "He believes that financial planning qualifies him to evaluate medical competence." "That's not how medicine works," Dr. Chen replied with the firm authority that Marcus had been denying me for years. "Emergency nursing experience, particularly cardiac specialty, provides diagnostic observation skills that many physicians respect. Your documentation here demonstrates clinical expertise, not parental anxiety." The validation hit me like oxygen after years of suffocation. This was what professional respect felt like. Medical authority recognizing medical competence rather than dismissing it through gender and relationship hierarchy. "Dr. Chen, I need Emma evaluated immediately," I said, my voice carrying the professional urgency that had saved lives during my ER years. "And I need documentation that my observations were medically sound, not maternal paranoia." "I'll schedule Emma for comprehensive cardiac evaluation tomorrow," Dr. Chen replied, her tone matching my urgency. "And Diana, your husband needs to understand that dismissing nursing expertise can have life-threatening consequences." What Marcus didn't know was that his just-a-nurse wife was about to receive institutional medical validation that would destroy his narrative of professional incompetence. What Dr. Mitchell didn't know was that her medical malpractice was about to be exposed by the very nursing expertise she'd been systematically dismissing. Tomorrow, the woman they'd both underestimated would demonstrate exactly what happens when professional competence meets institutional backing. The next morning, I sat in the cardiac imaging suite at Johns Hopkins, watching Dr. Chen and 2 cardiology residents review Emma's echocardiogram results with the systematic precision I'd been applying to her symptoms for 3 years. "Mom," Emma whispered, her face pale as the ultrasound wand moved across her chest. "I've been feeling those heart flutters you kept asking about. I thought they were just stress from medical school." My chest tightened, not from my own irregular rhythm, but from maternal vindication mixed with fear. 3 years of systematic observation, 3 years of dismissed concerns, 3 years of being called paranoid by a woman who had been compromising medical judgment for personal gain. The echocardiogram shows clear evidence of early-stage cardiomyopathy, Dr. Chen announced to the room, her voice carrying the professional authority that Marcus had been denying me for years. "Mild ventricular wall thickening, reduced exercise tolerance, intermittent arrhythmias, exactly as documented in the nursing assessment." Nursing assessment. The same systematic observation that Dr. Mitchell had dismissed as maternal anxiety and Marcus had reduced to paranoia was now being recognized as clinically accurate diagnostic work. "Dr. Walsh," Dr. Chen addressed Emma with the respect her new medical degree commanded. "Your mother's documentation is textbook clinical observation. Her emergency nursing background enabled diagnostic assessment that potentially saved your life." Emma's eyes filled with tears as she looked at me with newfound understanding. "Dad kept saying you were overreacting, that Dr. Mitchell said I was fine. I believed him instead of trusting your medical expertise." The words hit like absolution after years of professional crucifixion. My daughter, now a doctor herself, finally understood that her mother's medical concerns had been life-saving professional judgment, not hysterical maternal overreaction. "Emma needs immediate cardiac medication and lifestyle modifications," Dr. Chen continued, turning to me with professional respect that validated everything Marcus had dismissed. "Mrs. Walsh, your systematic documentation prevented progression to advanced cardiomyopathy. This is exceptional nursing work." My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Where are you? Dr. Mitchell is concerned about your medical obsession with Emma. We need to discuss getting you professional help for your anxiety." Professional help for anxiety. While I sat in a cardiac imaging suite receiving institutional validation of diagnostic expertise that had potentially saved our daughter's life, I showed the text to Dr. Chen, whose expression shifted to professional outrage that transcended medical consultation. "Mrs. Walsh, this is medical gaslighting of the most dangerous kind. Your observations were clinically sound, dismissing them as psychological symptoms is medical malpractice." Medical malpractice. The same words I'd been thinking about Dr. Mitchell's deliberate misdiagnosis of Emma's cardiac condition. "Dr. Chen," I said, my voice carrying the professional authority that years of emergency medicine had earned. "I need official documentation that my nursing assessment was medically accurate." My husband needs to understand that dismissing my expertise nearly cost our daughter her life. I'll provide comprehensive documentation, Dr. Chen replied with institutional backing that would destroy Marcus's narrative of my professional incompetence. And Mrs. Walsh? Any physician who dismisses nursing expertise of this caliber should have their medical judgment questioned. What Marcus didn't know was that his just-a-nurse wife was about to walk into his office with Johns Hopkins documentation, proving that her paranoia had been life-saving medical expertise. What Dr. Mitchell didn't know was that her medical malpractice was about to be exposed by the nursing competence she'd been systematically undermining to maintain her affair. This afternoon, they would both discover exactly what happens when professional dismissal meets institutional vindication. 3 hours later, I walked into Marcus's downtown office, carrying the Johns Hopkins medical report that would destroy everything he thought he knew about professional competence, medical authority, and the woman he'd spent 3 years systematically dismissing. His secretary looked up with the nervous recognition that wives visiting unexpectedly usually meant trouble. "Mrs. Walsh, Mr. Walsh is in a client meeting, but I can tell him his wife needs to discuss our daughter's cardiac diagnosis." I replied with the professional authority that years of emergency medicine had earned. "It's urgent." Marcus emerged from his conference room with 2 bewildered investors, his financial advisor confidence faltering as he saw me standing in his professional domain with medical documentation that contradicted everything he'd built his authority upon. "Diana, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice carrying forced casualness that couldn't hide his growing unease. "I thought we agreed you'd stop obsessing over Emma's health." "We need to talk about Emma's cardiomyopathy diagnosis," I replied, watching his face go pale as the words registered. Johns Hopkins confirmed early-stage cardiac disease requiring immediate treatment. The silence in his office was deafening. His clients exchanged glances as Marcus struggled to process information that obliterated 3 years of dismissing my medical expertise as maternal paranoia. "That's impossible," he said, his voice cracking with the desperation of a man whose entire worldview was crumbling. "Dr. Mitchell confirmed Emma was healthy. You're misunderstanding something." I handed him the Johns Hopkins report with Dr. Chen's official assessment. Comprehensive cardiac evaluation confirms early-stage cardiomyopathy consistent with systematic nursing documentation provided by Mrs. Diana Walsh. Emergency nursing expertise enabled life-saving diagnostic observation. Marcus read the report 3 times, his hands trembling as years of professional arrogance met institutional medical reality. His clients watched their confident financial advisor transform into a man whose judgment about everything had just been systematically destroyed. "Dr. Mitchell was wrong," he whispered, the words barely audible as his medical authority narrative collapsed. 3 years of being wrong while you were His voice broke completely. "Well, I was right about our daughter's cardiac condition," I finished, my voice carrying the professional vindication that had been denied for years. "While your just-a-nurse wife was potentially saving Emma's life through diagnostic expertise you dismissed as paranoia." Mrs. Walsh, Marcus's client, interrupted, recognizing medical competence when confronted with it. "You're a cardiac nurse. My daughter's applying to nursing school. Emergency medicine is incredibly demanding." The professional respect from a stranger hit harder than any vindication from Marcus ever could. This was what acknowledgement felt like, medical expertise recognized and valued rather than systematically undermined. "Dr. Mitchell," Marcus began, then stopped as understanding hit him like cardiac arrest. 3 years of hotel receipts, 3 years of jewelry purchases, 3 years of trusting a woman who had compromised medical judgment for personal gain, while his wife's expertise could have saved their daughter's life. "Yes, Marcus," I said quietly, watching his face as every piece of systematic betrayal fell into place. "The woman you trusted over your wife's medical expertise was the same woman you've been having an affair with while she deliberately misdiagnosed our daughter." The complete destruction was beautiful in its simplicity. His medical authority gone, his professional judgment obliterated, his marriage destroyed by his own documented choices. "Diana," he sobbed, the confident financial advisor reduced to a man whose arrogance had nearly cost his daughter her life. "I'm sorry, I was wrong about everything." But this wasn't about apologies anymore. This was about a woman who had finally reclaimed the professional respect that had always been hers. I walked out of his office, leaving Marcus to explain to his clients why their financial advisor couldn't distinguish between medical competence and maternal anxiety. Emma was waiting in my car, her medical degree and cardiac medication, both symbols of knowledge that would never again be dismissed by men who confused authority with expertise. "Mom," she said, tears streaming down her face, "I'm sorry I didn't trust your medical judgment. You saved my life." The woman who had been just a nurse smiled at her daughter, the doctor, knowing that professional respect had finally found its way home.